So I've learned that actually dreams has a timeline.
I love that.
And then they expire.
Yeah.
And you need to act on them.
It created this sense of urgency in you.
Exactly.
If you want it.
Yes. You should go and have a shot at it. So it went like crazy, went like mad. We became like the most viewed travel channel in the Middle East in like a couple of months. I see a struggle somehow and I see a problem. And then whenever I think about how big the problem is and what could be the possible solutions to fix it, that's my key drive.
So were you trying to date and you were like, this is hard?
I need to build an app.
I'll say the story. So I talked to many girls, right? And they said, yeah, we will never use dating apps because men are not serious. Like it's not even a possibility. I had a big group of friends back home. And then I told them like, guys, do you know like online dating apps? And they're like, yeah. And like, yeah, we use it sometimes to find girls. And then I started writing down how they do it. And I went to the team and I said, okay, let's reverse that. So let's make sure that whoever used the app is not with that intention. Let's make sure that whoever used the app is actually...
It's like reverse customer research.
Exactly.
But there must have been something that drove you to keep going. I'm really keen to hear what that was.
The problem, like the women in my family, like whenever I think that if I don't do this,
then it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist and then they will keep suffering. Luck is very much like underrated. So it's a lot of hard work, right? It's also talent and skill.
Welcome to The Startup Leap, the #1 podcast interviewing startup founders who have taken the leap into starting their own businesses.
Here on The Startup Leap, we hear real, raw, and relatable stories of these entrepreneurs, how they've navigated taking the leap, and the decisions they've made. We're your hosts.
I'm Abon.
And I'm Maria.
And this is the Startup Leap podcast.
Yvonne and Maria are partners at Local Globe and OpenSeed VC, respectively. Local Globe and OpenSeed are independent of the Startup Leap podcast. Any statements made by Maria, Yvonne, or the Startup Leap guests are solely their view and are not advice. Endorsements by the Startup Leap, its guests, Maria and Yvonne.
So welcome to another episode of The Startup Leap. Today we're super excited to have Sameh, the founder of MNZL, a 3-time founder who previously sold one of his businesses to MTCH Group. And his third company, who he's recently just raised for, is one that you really, really want to hear about.
I was born and raised in Cairo, but then after high school, I got a scholarship to study in Malaysia.
Okay.
And
when did you, at what age? I'm trying to figure out what phase in your life.
I was 17 years old.
Okay.
And it was like life-changing because like it was my first time outside
of
Egypt.
Oh, wow.
Exactly.
Really?
Yeah. And then all
that
on your
must have
own.
been an experience in itself.
It was crazy.
Leaving home.
Yes.
Going to another continent.
Yes.
At 17.
And it's not something common in Egypt. Like, or I think in Africa in general.
Yeah.
Like,
That's true, actually.
Yes.
Very few people like take a gap year or like go
exactly.
to countries.
These are things we started learning later, like when we met people living in the US and
And
Europe.
you're like, you better do
like,
that and get it. Yeah.
Exactly. So it was very very big decision to make to just leave the country and go to Malaysia.
I had a question first, like, what is it like growing up in Egypt? Because I think like, even for listeners who may be Africans or even Europeans or global listeners, there is so much, I guess, fragmentation in the experience of a particular place within Africa. Egypt is different from Nigeria, from South Africa. So paint us a picture.
Yeah.
And when you hear Africa, or maybe people growing up, sometimes people feel like it's so different. But we have the same experiences. You wake up, you go to school, you probably go to church, you go to your family. So I would love like what was the average day growing up in Egypt for you?
Well, I mean, back like that, we're talking about like 25 years ago, like
it was a different
30 years
time.
ago.
Yeah.
It was very different. But the beauty of it was like more, the inequality was not so big. So you find like the middle class, the lower class, not so far off from the high class. So we used to go to government schools, right?
Okay.
Used to, because now it's
not,
very
it's
different.
Yeah.
But like you get a fair amount of education in a government school.
Okay.
And then, you walk, you use like public transportation. And it was fine.
Yeah.
Now it's getting harder and harder to do that.
Yeah.
And the gap is getting much, much bigger. But at that time, yes. And then you basically learn at school, and then it's a very also like Egypt is, because you mentioned church. Also, Egypt is a very like, religious country. So Muslims and Christians, like we have the prayers, we go to it and we use it in our day-to-day languages.
Interesting.
And I to be honest, I enjoyed growing up in Egypt. And there's always this which same with like other African countries, there's always this like hustling mentality.
Spirit, yeah.
So you like when I was young, like I learned how to negotiate, like watching my mother buying like clothes, you know, from the street.
No one negotiates like an African.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes, it's crazy.
You're
So
right.
you had that
Brilliant.
early entrepreneurial exposure from your mother. That's so interesting.
Yes, like you could see like when she and the guy like, oh, this is like for £10. And it's like, no, £2.
Yeah,
I'm like, wow.
How did we go from
Yeah.
10 to 2? You know, like secretly, I think it's like the African thing. You learn it
Yes.
like everywhere at the market. And yeah, you'd be very surprised how low it can go from 10 to 2.
Yes, and
Even
then
when I go to countries that are not
Where
where
it's
you
not
go, that my
culturally
mom always
appropriate.
tries. I'm like, please don't
Holding
bring that here.
yeah,
Interesting.
and I believe also like I was fortunate enough to live in a not very like upper class family. So you see like things. So there's always this hustling, and you live on scarcity as well.
Yeah.
Like everything is scarce, and like you really work hard to get it.
And to be innovative as well.
Yes, and I love that, to be honest. Like it helps so much in the entrepreneurial journey eventually.
True.
Yeah.
So Malaysia, why
Yes.
Malaysia?
So Malaysia was like the only option for me to travel outside Egypt and see
How
something
come?
else. Because again, it wasn't something common at all to travel. Like it was like, again, coming from like a middle lower class family. So you don't travel for tourism.
Yeah.
And to travel for work, you need to be really, really good to travel.
Yeah.
So I scored well in my education. And then there was these scholarships started coming. So I got a scholarship to study in an Egyptian university, like American university.
Yeah.
But then there was this scholarship where you travel to Malaysia for 5 years and they like pay for everything, the cost and everything.
And you were like,
I
sign
was
me
like,
up.
of course.
Interesting.
Yes, and I was of course scared to take
absolutely.
that step.
Did you know anyone in Malaysia? Like,
Zero.
What was your reference point?
Zero.
Like, zero.
Yeah,
Did
it
you
was
so
zero. It was-
brave?
Did you go ahead, like do research? Was it what was the going through your mind
So
when you
at that
decided to
time
actually
there was
go?
no like what is research? Like
Yeah,
there was
so
no
there's no
like Google,
internet,
there's
like,
no
yeah,
internet,
yeah.
there was nothing. Like even it's a funny story, but I remember on the very first few months there, I still used letters.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
You're dating yourself, Sameh.
Yeah,
And you're
so-
telling us how old you are. So people are like, letters? Like,
What's
what
that?
do you mean?
it's just like whenever I remember these stories, it's a good reminder to where we are today with
Yeah,
tech.
that is
But like I
true.
used letters as a way of communication, you know,
Okay.
and then emails, and then after a
came
year or
after.
two, then it was like the Gmail,
Yeah.
and then calls and like Messenger and
times have
Skype, and
changed.
it's changed massively. Yes, but we didn't know anyone, and then it was a big like step to take. And there was no reference point. So
That's, I think, very interesting that
Yes.
you had not. How did you
Yes.
convince your parents? Like, what was the situation when
Oh,
you were
it was,
telling family, like, I'm going to Malaysia? They're like, Malay, what? Like,
Yeah,
where
they-
is
And
they
that?
said-
that's quite a bold move to
Yeah.
move to
Yes.
a whole another country without your family.
yes,
You don't know anything about the country.
Did you have that
Yes.
conversation with your family?
of course so my mom was like, no. But my father supported.
Okay.
Like he saw like the value of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It was also like very like from the very rare scholarships given by the government. So the government sponsored the whole trip. And it was something like, you know, like they pay for you and then
Yeah.
eventually you go work
Yeah.
for the government after that. And these are not, again, this is a very, very few opportunities in Egypt at
Got
that
it.
time.
Yeah.
So my father supported, my mother was like, no. And then we overruled my mother and then I went. But it was an event that I think really changed
Yeah.
a lot in my trajectory in general, like in my life trajectory.
Yeah,
I can imagine
a lot
so.
of like, I think like teenage years are so impressionable.
Yes.
And there are some things that can happen that can kind of change your worldview entirely. I'm curious, on the family front, was maybe your dad or your mom or siblings or family, were there entrepreneurs around you? Like, was there any early signal that kind of showed you can just wake up, think something, decide to create it, decide to sell it, and people buy it? Like, what was that reference point growing up for you?
Like, I think the reference point was more like the culture in Egypt in general and like the scarcity and
Yeah.
the hustling mentality.
Okay.
And to be honest, like, so my father and my mother, they work like day-to-day jobs. Like
Yeah.
my mother is a teacher, was
Yeah.
a teacher, and my father like was working in a like sales in a company,
Yeah.
day-to-day job, the same job for all their lives. And that's why actually I didn't learn what is entrepreneurship. Like I didn't know what's entrepreneurship. Like I haven't seen someone doing it, but I've always wanted to fix things.
Yeah.
Since I was really young, and that's actually what got me into engineering, because also like I like problem solving and stuff. And later I learned that this is called entrepreneurship.
Okay.
So there wasn't really a clear model of that. Of course, and it will be funny, but of course, watching the movies of the social network, you know, Zuckerberg and Facebook and stuff, and then you start saying, oh, like
so this is a thing.
This is a thing, and then you learn from it, which highlights the value of these type of things, right? Like the podcast, or like back home, people starting to learn the stories, like when there are exits and stuff, and then they learn about it and inspire them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what was it that, I guess, when was that moment that you were really exposed to entrepreneurship? Because this is like
your first try, or the
Exactly.
early thinkings of it, like where you start experimenting, but you don't know that's what you're doing yet. You're just trying to fix a problem.
So I remember actually at school, I saw that there was a gap on selling actually nuts at school. That was my first actually project, and it was in 2 weeks' time. It was so successful that the school has to shut us down.
Whoa! Wow!
I swear, because we were taking most of the revenue from the actual school.
That is what you
store.
call market pull.
Yes.
wow.
That's the market pull.
In 2 weeks. And then they shut us down. They're like, okay, you either do this or get expelled. So it's that was actually the very
Which one
early.
did you decide?
No,
He was like, nuts
Shut it
is
down.
not ambitious enough for me.
yeah, it's like the authority. So we're like, we shut it down. And then later, actually, I remember also, so in Egypt, where we live, so there's no like gas pipes. So we used to have the butane cylinders for this thing. So you wait so much for the guy to pass if you so that problem kept it's like this. We have telephones, and then why don't we? So I told my mom, and I was very young as well. Told her like I just need to print the phone number at our home on all these things, and then send it to people, and then I read
That is smart. That's like a market.
And then and then she's like, "What? Like no." We're not gonna be like the guys selling.
So people would call you and then tell you that they needed the gas, and you'd be like, "I'll get it right to you."
Exactly.
That was
And
like
then-
that's on-demand delivery. You were like
Literally.
early.
Yes. I still regret not going ahead with that project until today. I think it would have been my biggest exit. Like
That is, what year was this? I'm trying to like place this.
that was like super early. That's 2003,
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That predates Uber.
2004. Yeah. So those were the early signs,
Yeah.
right? And then through university, I've also like wanted to do like the ride hailing stuff, and then so mobile phones was still not smartphones was not very thing, and then
Still very early.
everyone told me like who would use phones for that and stuff. The funny thing, and maybe I'll skip forward a bit. The funny thing is that at work they made this entrepreneurship exam at my like day-to-day job, like the oil and gas job.
Okay.
And then from that exam, I scored so high on entrepreneurship that I said, "Oh, okay,
Maybe
This is my
actually-
thing.
this is my thing." So it's called entrepreneurship, and it's a thing, and that's how you do it. So
And
Wait,
so
what
you-
exam was this? Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm trying
because
to
you
figure out
did
like
you did engineering,
yes,
then
So-
you went into oil and gas. I'd love to
Yes.
unpick that a bit more.
yes, yes. So actually, like I love math and science and stuff. So the nearest thing for that earns us money is oil and gas engineering. So I did engineering in Malaysia, that scholarship, and I did oil and gas. And the idea is that I graduate, then I work on the oil and gas companies and earn
got it.
pretty well.
So that's why they have the scholarship. They like pay for
Exactly.
you, and then you go back and
Exactly,
Interesting.
exactly, yes. And that's what actually got me into the oil and gas, and I enjoyed actually working in the oil and gas for a bit.
Yeah.
So when I graduated, so I finished like my school, and then I did almost 6 years
In Malaysia.
in Malaysia doing
Wow.
oil and gas.
I would
Yeah.
love to talk about the Malaysia experience.
Yeah.
So, for context, or maybe just my ignorance, in Malaysia, what's the language that's spoken there? Is it different from that in Egypt?
Yes, it's Malay,
Okay.
so Bahasa Melayu.
Yeah.
But in Malaysia, so rich experience because there are like different cultures.
Yeah.
They live together. So there's the Malay culture, the Indian culture, the Chinese culture.
Interesting.
And again, imagine someone living in Egypt all his life, only seeing Egyptians and like doesn't even know what like there are other cultures that exist, like and meeting anyone from those cultures. Like we see the movies like Hollywood, but that's it. So suddenly you are in Malaysia, 3 different cultures, Bahasa Melayu is the official spoken language.
Did
but
you
we all
speak any of that?
A little bit.
Was
Yes.
it because of does it have like similarities with Arabic? Like how,
They do, yeah.
Okay, so you could pick a bit of that.
Yes, but like
Okay.
when you think about 12 years in Malaysia, I should be more fluent, but I'm not because they all speak in good English.
Oh,
like,
okay,
they
so
all
you
speak English.
don't need
No.
it. Yeah.
And when you try to speak the language,
they're like,
They
don't,
default
don't,
to
it's
English,
just like, let it
they
go.
reply in English. So it's very tough
Okay.
to learn it. But Malaysia was so rich because suddenly you see all these different cultures living together. And at the same time, like being an expat in a different place, it forces you to meet all these other cultures as well. And I think it's very, very important. I can attribute that experience to being the person I am today. Not only actually in terms of like vision and in terms of like knowing how the world works, but also in terms of empathy and diversity and like
I can totally relate to that. I mean, I spent some time living in Japan, Israel, and South Africa, and just having that real global exposure from where home is, away from home, just exposes you to just so many rich cultures and understanding the way different cultures communicate and various nuances.
Yes.
Invaluable experience.
Yes. I can't imagine like to be honest, like actually that drove my first actually startup idea, but like I really wanted everyone to travel and see those different cultures because
that makes sense.
Yes, yes, the
I was like,
value is
travel
huge.
in Egypt. I'm like at that time, it wasn't even so much the location. It was like you kind of see like the networks of flights or like trips across Africa. You know. That it's harder to kind of leave.
And outbound travel.
Exactly. So I was like, so that makes complete sense.
Rich.
And Malaysia's a bit of a hub, right? And so a lot of countries that you can travel to within Asia from Malaysia.
Yes.
So that makes perfect
And I remember like the first time I traveled for leisure. So I traveled for education, right?
Yeah.
And then there was the holiday and then people traveling. So we decided to travel to an island.
Where did you go?
We went to an island called Perhentian.
Okay.
In Malaysia?
In Malaysia.
Okay.
It's beautiful. Like it's such a lovely place.
Yeah.
But on the island, I met backpackers at that time, and I'm doing this because
first time meeting
first time
backpackers.
is like, what is that?
What
are you doing?
You're like, say that again. Explain it to me.
Yeah.
You're like, I just like take my backpack and I'm like, just like that's all the luggage you have, and you're just like, are you going somewhere to do something?
And for months, like for a few months, like you're saying, oh, like if you like, what do you do in this few months?
Carry all your possessions in one bag.
Yes. And it was really eye-opener. And then you talk to them and you realize, oh, like there's so much to the standard model that we have in Egypt and Africa, where you like you study, you work, you get married, and like
you have kids,
and you know, and that's how it is. Like so, it was an eye-opener, and I said no, like, and I did that for a bit, right? So I started like backpacking for a bit, and and I just wanted everyone to do the same.
And then the idea.
So how did that idea turn into a business? Talk to us about that journey.
Because part that fueled my idea about travel when I was younger is that it's for rich people.
Right.
So in order to travel, you have to book like an expensive flight and then a resort or a hotel. That's what we know, right? But then you suddenly realize that you could travel for a few months in Southeast Asia with the cost
backpack,
of and that's actually was the idea of the first startup. So it started as a media company, and then
a YouTube channel,
channel.
Okay.
Yes.
I want to. So the entire thing about the podcast, the Startup Leap, is that there are people who are in that place where you were pre the first leap.
Yes.
So they're probably like ruminating, they're thinking.
Yeah.
But then, either slowly or all at once, it becomes more real. So I would love, because it sounds like yours was slowly, since it was like a media company before it became like, okay, maybe this could be a business. Before you picked up the first like thing to record, like I would love to understand how that love became an action.
Yes.
That became like this microscopic representation of what eventually it became.
Yeah, this is a very good area to speak about, because you will be surprised, but I had this very first idea about doing that in 2009.
Yeah.
2008.
Was this before
During Malaysia.
Okay, during Malaysia. Okay.
And it took me 5 years to shoot that. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. What was it that stopped you from actually pursuing it, given that you had the idea in your mind
That's
already?
the thing, because I think people don't understand that they can do stuff. They think it's like, oh, like that guy did it, but because of blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
And that girl did it because of that. But they don't actually have the self-belief that they can actually do it. And that haunted me for a while. It's like, oh,
Interesting.
I have all these ideas. Like, I think I can do la la la. But then I didn't dare to take the step
How did you overcome
and
that?
put me out there. So one of my dreams was actually to become a footballer as well.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So
who inspired you on this one? Like,
no, that was
when
my
you were-
father when I
okay.
was like 2 years
Okay.
old. It's like,
Okay.
yeah, I love playing football and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
watching football and stuff. So at some point, I just felt that I don't really have it in me to become a football player. But then I keep trying, and then with some like training, and that I became older, right? So university,
Yeah.
and then like started even like end of university first
Yeah.
work, and I started getting really better at it. And then I said, okay, maybe I have a shot. I was getting older, right? And then I had an injury in my knees,
Oh, no.
and when the injury happened, I understood that my chances are gone for a dream that I've dreamed for so long,
Yeah.
but I didn't really act on it.
Right.
So I've learned that actually dreams has a timeline,
I love that.
and then they expire,
Yeah.
and you need to act on them.
I
It
love
created this
that.
sense of urgency in you.
Exactly. It's like, oh, you cannot just dream about things. Like if you want something,
Yeah, you're
go
on
and
the-
get it.
It is. This is. I really resonate with that because I think that many times people almost act as though life is guaranteed.
Yes.
I mean, that was an accident, but like so many things in life can happen
Right.
where in that moment you
Yes.
just can't chase it anymore.
Exactly.
So you have to like, if you want it,
Yes.
act as though you're on borrowed time.
Yes.
I really, really like that.
Yes. Yeah. You learn that the window for opportunity is not forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then if you have a great idea, or it doesn't have to be actually a business, right?
Yeah.
Like if there's something you always want to do, you should go and have a shot at
I
it.
think
Yeah.
And it's always that the regret of not doing it
Exactly.
outweigh if you fail in it or whatever.
Exactly.
Like it's,
Something my father
yes.
used to always say to me is, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah,
Just go
exactly.
back to normal life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. One thing I would love to like learn a bit more about was why you felt you couldn't do it. I really believe in the concept of self-efficacy. You need to see
Yes.
someone else to somewhere in your brain make the pattern
Yeah.
that you too can do it. Like it doesn't even have to be someone that looks exactly like you. It could be someone you relate to, someone you don't feel out of reach. So this is a theory, and then people talk about this, but I would love to try to understand why that natural, because there are other people who just,
Yeah.
think things and they're like, of course, sure.
Yeah.
Like they don't even face that roadblock. So why do you think it took you a long time for you to believe that you could do it?
I think one thing we didn't know is that important is like having a mentor and an idol. So again, like these are things that I believe if it change in Africa, things could change massively because the idols are footballers
Yeah.
and like actors and singers. So
Yeah.
so all my life, it's like the most successful people are actually footballers and like and singers. So there wasn't an entrepreneur example or an idol that I could actually dream of becoming. So I think that's why it took me so long to understand that actually, no, there is like something that you could actually, people have done it before in different countries. And we didn't have a lot of examples at that time in Egypt, right? Like, so 2010, like in Africa, there was very few successful entrepreneurs
and startups.
and other entrepreneurs or like successful businessmen are all family businesses.
Yeah,
So you
and they're
cannot
usually
relate.
like no disrespect, like middle age. Like
Yeah,
you don't
yeah,
see
yeah.
then you don't see like a young. The idea of like a
No,
young tech lady or like a guy
No.
was not a thing.
Yes, they're all like family businesses,
Yeah,
and there wasn't. And I think that answers your question. Like that why I thought that it does not exist. If we focus more on getting like an idol and like showing more these like successful
Yeah.
examples, I think many entrepreneurs would come out of Africa and like
As a
the
result.
people. Yeah,
But I think it's changing, so that's good
Yes.
because and I think in the era of technology as well, you are seeing people sharing their stories. You
Yeah.
are seeing people's journeys actually, like when they start, how they kind of
Yes.
evolve and grow. So I think that's positive. But
Yes.
yeah, that's interesting.
yes.
So you picked up the camera and started
Yes.
filming on YouTube.
So I was like, oh, so I cannot be a footballer. And this like that dream has expired. Because also I had another dream to become a Nobel Prize winner, but that's a different story.
Okay, we need to unpick that as
I
well.
was like, that's very
But then-
specific.
I love math and physics. Like I love science in
I
general.
see.
But then when that happened, I suddenly like, okay, so I brought on people to support and
Yeah.
like, so Yara, she's like my
Yeah.
co-founder in the business.
Was
of,
she the first, when you were thinking about the first people to support, because you just said, I found people to support. Now, some people struggle with that bit.
Yes, of course.
Because first they start, they first haven't even like built conviction in themselves. And they're like, I then need to go get someone else on board.
Yes.
Was it a natural association for your co-founder? Like it was just like logical. Like if I'm going to try to do this,
No.
that's the person I would do. Or did you like seek her out? I'm curious, what was that process?
No, it's very like, so I was speaking about this, right? And the others, they don't know that these things actually exist at all.
Right.
So they are like,
Okay.
oh, it's not just like you have a dream that hard to do. Is like, what are you saying?
There's no reference point. Like, we
there's
don't
no
even
at all.
have.
Yes. So I was actually trying to convince my school friends to do this project, but then they didn't
And
really take
were
it
they
seriously.
with you in Malaysia or were
Yeah,
they
yeah,
back
yeah.
home in Egypt?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but they didn't really take it
Seriously,
seriously. Until Yara, like she saw like this is actually is
So it
could
was
become
her enthusiasm that
yes,
attracted.
yes, and she's very also like natural on the camera.
Okay.
Like so, I saw a golden opportunity. It's
Yeah.
like someone actually who could be the face
I see.
Right.
and run this.
So she was the face,
Yes.
but you thought of it.
Yeah. So I was
Interesting.
yeah. So I was more the brains, right? I was
And you were okay with that. Like,
Yeah.
the reason why I say this is because there's also often the dynamic between like founders
yeah.
and people who are trying to build something together. It's like,
Yeah.
who is the person who represents us? And
Yeah.
you seemed quite natural in your, it was logical that she would be the face because she was natural. She was a natural at it or is. But many people don't often get to that place naturally. So I'm
Yeah.
curious about the
So
rationale there.
like it's a learning process of how to kind of choose your co-founders and the dynamics of working with the co-founders. Like I'm happy to go through it now,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, absolutely.
to discuss it now. But I think working with co-founders and people actually, like friends and family
Yeah.
that you know from before is very delicate.
Yeah.
And you need to do it a couple of times to
Before-
understand how like very complex the relationship is
Yeah.
with a co-founder, right? So it's more like marriage in a way.
Yeah.
And then when you have a personal relationship, so I have with Yara
overlays
and
on that,
with my
yeah.
current co-founders as well, it just complicates it very much.
Mm.
So I really don't know how to explain it
Yeah.
unless you have to go through it and experience it. So I've experienced that like 4 times,
Now,
like almost like, yeah.
Interesting.
Well,
So-
that means you've had quite a positive experience then, I'm assuming, because I mean, you hear all
Yes.
these horror stories, don't do business with friends, and people tend to steer away from doing that. So I'd love to understand, what have you done to make it work?
So, I mean, we've tried a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
along the 4 startups that I did, there was always this family or like friend member, and you try different things. So at the beginning, it's like, everything is like we're
Yeah.
together in this, like you're
Yeah.
building and like doing the personal relationship with the work relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's it's a very tough road to take
Yeah.
because whatever it is, the ups and downs
It
in
will
the
affect
startups,
both.
it will
Yeah.
affect both, and
Yeah.
then you're just putting all the eggs in the same
Yeah.
basket. So what I've learned is that you have to be very mature from the early days and ask yourself a question: is that remove the relationship? There's also this, maybe the term I would say is a bit of, I'm doing it, but I will say the term. There's a bit of laziness.
Yeah. In just going with people
It's going to people that you know. and that are-
Interesting. That's a contrarian view because some people would say
Yes.
like, you know them, you've worked with them, you know their
Yes.
quirks, they're the safest bet. But you're like,
Of course, I'll say that as well. I will say that as well.
interesting.
But there's definitely a bit of laziness because those are the people
You're just
surrounding you.
defaulting to what
Exactly.
you're used to.
Exactly. So eventually it's like, are they really, really good at what they do
Yeah.
or not? So if you remove this relationship and you've met like 20 people,
Would you still pick
would you
them?
still pick them or not? You have to run yourself through this
Okay.
like mental and mind.
And
Yeah.
did you do
Questions.
that with the first
No.
company? At what point,
No.
given that this is your 4th company now that you
Yes.
started, did you
Yes.
realize, okay, let's benchmark these individuals
Yes.
against,
Yes.
others in the
So
market?
you learned.
Yes. So I learned from the first and second
Okay.
company because you try, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then some worked really well, some didn't work well, and then you learn from it.
Yeah.
And then I guess when it doesn't work well, the best thing is like to have the conversation and say, okay, like
It's not
this is
working.
where we are today.
Yeah.
And we need to build this for years.
Yeah.
So do you want to continue
Yeah.
or not? And have
Did you
this
have
like
to
hard
have that
measures?
conversation for the
A
first
couple of times, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And,
Yeah.
and did it have an impact on the friendships longer term?
So, I mean, we can ask them.
You like bring them on the pod and like, yeah, so.
I like to think that if you have the basis of fairness in the conversation, and then it's not like
I love that.
my way or the highway. You
Yeah.
just sit together and like run it together and try to find a common ground.
Yeah.
I would like to believe that most of these like conflicts has been resolved in
That
a really
way.
good way. Luckily, it's been resolved early on before like the business gets really really tricky. And that luckily I learned that lesson really early on. So the family and friends that I know that we won't be able to work together and like that. So we stopped very early.
Yeah.
And I started like for example my fourth start. So I worked also with one of my friends who helped me with a very early investment.
Yeah.
But then he wasn't really ready to jump full time
Oh, I see.
on what we do. So at the right moment, we're like, okay, this is getting really big and I need all the help I can. So if you cannot come full time, so you have to, and then we've resolved it as well.
Interesting.
But currently in my current startup, so I have like two amazing co-founders.
Yeah, we'll
like,
get to that.
Yeah.
I feel like we've not even talked about like the introduction.
I'll just talk about the co-founding aspect of it.
Yeah.
So
And they're both your friends as well.
yes.
Yeah.
So I worked also like previously with one of my friends like Ziad, and we did so Yara, and now she's luckily we all learned, right? So Yara is running an amazing Airbnb business and it's doing great in Cairo. And then Ziad, he's doing like a really great like scale up startup in Cairo,
So you
Egypt.
all learned from the lessons.
Yes,
So
like raising like millions and millions of dollars and doing really, really great. And Ali, a person also in my previous startup Harmonica, he's doing all this like businesses and investments and so on. So we've all learned. My current co-founders like Basim and Desui, they have had similar experiences.
So they've brought their own learnings as well,
Okay.
which makes things so much easier.
Exactly. So I mean, that's winning the lot. They say, that's winning the lot. So now
I love that.
So now you actually have someone who's really really experienced and have a lot of experience, and you have the trust that you talked about, and that's make things perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So coming back to picking up the video, you started the business, and then it evolves from being a YouTube channel. Talk to us more about that journey.
So I think the gap was just huge. Like you have this content. Again, we're talking about 2013, 14. So it's very early on in Africa.
Yeah.
You have this educating people that they can actually travel, and this is what you can see, and it's very cheap. So it went like crazy, went like mad.
Amazing.
So we became like the most viewed travel channel in the Middle East in like a couple of months. It was a lot of hard work. So these are the things also you learn is that, like you can't become successful without hard work.
Especially, I think like media stuff even makes it more deceptive because it just looks nice. And they're like, oh, you guys look like you're having a good time. You're like, if you know.
Yes.
Interesting.
No, it's a lot of hard work.
It's not a matter of just picking up the camera.
It's not.
Yeah. And at that time, like, so after my injury, I said like, no, I will do this, right?
Okay.
And I've always believed that I'm a bit like, gifted, like smart at school, you get high grades. And I was like, oh, okay, so
I can
things
do it.
will happen. Like, and things will happen. And I didn't register that you have to work really, really, really hard for things to happen.
This happens with smart kids.
Yeah, exactly. It's a problem.
It's like also book smart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially that leap from like high school to uni. It usually happens where you're like, oh, I can get away with it. So then you get there like,
reality hits.
So you had that for a business.
Yeah.
You were like, oh, I don't need to do too much.
Yes.
And then it was very clear early on that you need to do more.
Like you put everything in. Like I remember like sleeping 2 hours a day because I was maintaining my day-to-day job.
Oh, you're doing it at the same time.
Exactly, because I cannot live without the salary. So,
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Because you were an engineer like during the day.
Yes. And
you were travel.
And again, like remember like
my
background. So I have to earn to live and like support my
Send
family
money
back home. So it was very, very important salary, right? That many are depending on it.
Yeah. So you can't just like be like, I'm going to chase this thing. Yeah.
Which is also part of misconception is that people think that, and even people sometimes use me as an example, is like, oh, he left the corporate and then
You're like, that's not.
I was no.
You were still hustling.
You're slowly leaving the corporate. It wasn't.
Like,
and we've had other guests actually that have had similar experiences.
Yes.
Where they're like they're working out where their primary like work is and they're trying to figure. Interesting.
Yes.
So when it started taking off, how was that tension? I guess with your employer and then also even your co-founder, because I think also when you start something, it's kind of controlled, it's nice. But when there's
Yes.
tension and pressure, people, you start seeing other sides.
Yes.
So how did you navigate that?
Luckily, like the tension started. So we started, right? So we started like building the like I'll get back to
The
this
channel,
point of
yeah.
the like sleeping really, really
Yeah.
like 2 hours a day and like working really hard for like I would say 6 months like
Wow.
of super, super hard work. And then use your holidays, weekends to travel somewhere and
In order to
record
get the content.
and then get the content
Yeah.
and then push it. It was
Insane.
when I reflect back at this time in my life, I just don't
So
get
it's
it.
not
like,
really a
You're like, how did that-
It's not.
how did that happen?
It was crazy, right?
Interesting.
It helped that my job was very like I used to do simulation, like so you run models,
Yeah.
Okay.
and then
engineering,
and then like you get the gist of it. So a project of 2 or 3 months,
yeah.
you could do it in a couple of weeks, and then you can have that flexibility. And for the job, here's my numbers,
Okay.
everything is
Yeah.
perfect, and you wait for the job to be executed. So that helped. But of course, at some point, this started taking off, and I started talking to my employers, like I would like to have like 6 months off,
Yeah.
and they're like, why? And like, yeah, just.
And so even
I have things
then,
to do.
you weren't going to leave completely. You just
Yes.
wanted time off,
Yes.
and then that default to come back
Exactly.
at a
Yes.
point in time in the
Yes.
future.
At that time, if you leave your work, it was very hard to get back,
in.
and then you lose
Okay.
the salary. So I
Okay.
was very hesitant, and I was fortunate enough that I could take 6 months
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
Right?
And so they granted you that time
yes,
off. Okay.
yes. Actually, a year in your contract, you can take 12 months off. So I
Okay.
took the first 6 months,
Okay.
and then we started getting these like sponsors, and the business
So you
was
started
was
earning
doing
some
well.
revenue.
Exactly, small, but very small that could sustain the travel.
Yeah.
And that's when we started moving it into a travel tech.
How did that? At what point were you like, hey, this traditional like content model isn't going to work, or was it more like there's an opportunity here? What was the rationale, like the thinking from expanding to like a travel tech? Given you
So,
both
yeah.
didn't have tech backgrounds, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Okay.
We didn't at all. But then we started learning that the content itself can only sustain travel. I think these are things we understood by
Yeah.
common sense.
Yeah.
Is like if you keep doing that, you can only get so that
Yeah.
far.
Just a scale. Yeah.
And we saw an opportunity.
Mhm.
Like there at that time we wanted to build a travel company where you actually say what you want to do, and then the algorithms and the AI, like that was
You're
Wow,
early
you were
again.
Yeah.
way before time.
But
Amazing.
This was
Yes.
before AI,
it's
right?
before AI,
Yeah.
but the technology didn't catch up. And
Of
I think
course.
that's
That was what killed.
that's a lesson on timing.
Market
Yeah.
timing.
exactly.
Yeah.
We were too
Too
early.
early.
So now I'm sending. I see a lot of startups
Yeah, yeah.
trying to solve that problem, and I'm sending it to my co-founders at that time.
That would be
and
such a funny joke between both of
yeah,
you.
yeah, we're like, wow, yeah. Only if we're 10, 10 years.
10 years a
on
little.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
Market timing is really interesting.
it's
isn't it?
very
Because-
interesting.
How long did you
Yeah.
run the travel tech startup for?
It was actually like that phase in my life was very, very rapid.
Mhm.
So we did the travel channel, and after like I think within a year we started building the travel
Tech.
tech.
Mhm.
So the media and then the travel tech. And I remember also one of the episodes we filmed in like South Africa, and that episode went viral. So we were on TV, we were
Yeah.
everywhere. So there was attention on what we do,
Yeah.
and I just felt that we have to turn this into a business.
Yeah.
Mm.
So we did the travel tech startup. We raised funds, and this is another mistake, right? And I'm happy now that I can say all the mistakes.
We're
that
happy
actually
to.
happened. But then I started this travel tech,
Mm.
and after 6 months, I started another company startup
Okay.
because I was just full of all these ideas, and I started
see.
seeing like the potential, and I wanted to do many things at the same time. And that was, of course, like something now. If someone tells me this, I'm like, no.
How did you navigate that? Telling your co-founder that, we've been working on this travel tech company. I've got another idea
Yes.
now.
I think with my co-founders, like the travel business, like started to pick up.
Mhm.
So I managed to get like really like more experienced
Okay.
co-founders.
Oh, I
Okay.
see.
And then they were like, okay, like we can do it as well.
So
Yeah,
they
So-
stepped in
okay.
Yeah, so
essentially
they
and
stepped
drove
in.
it forward.
Exactly.
Okay.
And at that time, like Ziad and Yara took it forward.
Okay.
And then I started the online dating business. But I spent like almost a year on the travel tech
It's
thing. We raised
before.
funds before, and like working on all the funnels and everything, and understanding how to actually address that market. And then I started the third business.
Got it.
That's
I
all in the span of 2 years.
I
Yeah.
have a question on the travel tech one.
Yeah.
Who built the tech?
So we had all these learnings on how to hire and like.
So you were just like
Yes.
scrappy, just trying to
Yes.
get it done.
Yes.
Okay,
At
fantastic.
these times, there wasn't any knowledge in the region. I remember, like I watched all the Sam Altman YC videos. All of it, like, you know, like one by one and taking notes and like, so that's how you hire your team. That was the only available data at that time. And then you learn how to do it and so on. But it was a long journey.
It was, and scrappy.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of information or mentors or advisors that can actually tell you if what you're doing is right.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
So what was the second startup that was so exciting?
So after the media travel, and then that was the online dating.
Okay. So did you go back to your engineering role before you started that, or was
I took the 6 months, I pushed things, and then I go back like 2 months. I take like a few weeks and I go back. You know, it was like that actually.
You must have been very good at your job.
Yeah.
You must have been very good. They're like, we don't want to let this guy go.
I had an amazing actually manager. It's very hard in corporate to find the right manager. So I had like a great manager who I was on assignment in Brunei with work, and he really understood like how like good I can do my job, and he allowed a bit of flexibility. But it's
okay.
And that's actually where luck comes in, right?
There's also an element of luck, If someone else if there was a parallel universe and you had a bad manager.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting. So now the dating startup, I would love to explore where that idea started from.
Yeah.
So many people have, I think, a perception of how you have an idea.
Yeah.
It's like, Eureka, oh my God, needs to exist. Like, you know, but I don't think it happens that way all the time. Sometimes it's just like instant and intense. And then sometimes it's like a slow burn. It could be like an earworm where it's like, this thing might make sense. And then you're like, I'm leaning to it. Like, maybe there's something there. So I'd love to understand what, I guess, the anatomy of what that was in your case for the dating startup.
Yeah, and I think different entrepreneurs are different. But like for my story, it has always been like, I see a struggle somehow and I see a problem. And then whenever I think about how big the problem is and what could be the possible solutions to fix it, that's my key drive.
So were you trying to date and you were like, this is hard?
I need to build an app.
I'll say the story. But that was the case, like of course in the travel, and I spoke about it, and the media as well, the travel channel. On the dating, it was actually my family. So like women in my family, like, so we are very like traditional Egyptian family.
Yeah.
So women wait until someone knocks the door or the mother goes and find someone for them, right? So it's arranged marriage at its core.
Yeah.
And then, so I was tasked to bring someone, you know, and then...
And you were like, I'm going to tell that. That's totally
and it was constantly, so my mother, she keeps calling me and is like, hey, like talk to that. Like, have you met anyone? And so on for consistently like 5-6 years, right? And then at that time, I saw in Malaysia that there was, I think, OkCupid at that time in Malaysia, and Tinder was starting to gain some popularity. And then immediately I was like, why none of these apps are actually working in the region? Instead of me doing that task and like really trying to, and I care because like women in the region, I find it very unfair that men could actually go knock the door. And men has the freedom.
You're being chosen. You're not choosing.
Exactly. And it was very obvious because I have a brother and sister, and I can totally see the two models where a guy could just say, oh, I like this girl. Like, okay, I'll go talk to her father or like something like this. And they can see many, many of them while the girl has to wait.
Yeah.
And I find that very, very like unjust. And the pressure also that the community puts on the women to get married. And I didn't like these two components. Big pressure for them.
And ability not to choose. And you can't choose. You can't choose. Yeah, that's crazy.
It drove me crazy. It drove me crazy. Like either or, right?
Yeah. So. I'm really, really curious because you speak about these cultural nuances, right? And a dating app must have been quite a taboo in Egypt.
Yes.
So how do you go from having an idea to actually
making
it
making
it into a business?
Yeah.
Raising money for it.
Yes.
Given how much of a taboo it must have been, and then getting the product in market and people to use it. I'd love to just hear about that journey.
Yes, it was a very, very interesting journey because we started from a big, massive problem that impacted a big market.
Yeah.
So at that time, there was like 10 million potential users that would use the app right away if something like this exists, right? But then you look at the other apps, like the Western apps, and you can see how there's a very huge difference between like the problem and the solution, right? There was a lot of cultural aspect that those apps would never get right.
Yeah.
And then that's where the idea comes from. And that's where like, okay, if we build an app, not copying, because many actually started just trying to copy, like something worked in the West. It's like, no, let's just get back to the
Basics,
workshops, understand like the first principles, like why are they not using Tinder, for example, at that time, right? And write that down and think of solutions.
Could I just unpick that? Because how did you actually go about doing that? Did you speak to individuals that had used the other apps in the market? Like, really want to understand the practical steps that you actually took in order to understand, why those other apps were not working in the market.
Yeah. So I did like a research, but like without the methodology, because I haven't learned the methodology yet, or I didn't have the means. But I remember, so I talked to many girls, right? And they said, we will never use dating apps because men are not serious and stuff like that. So it's a never, like it's not even a possibility. So I started I had a big group of friends back home, and then I brought them, like we were going out, and I remember there was like 12 guys.
Yeah.
And then I told them, like, guys, do you know like online dating apps? And they're like, yeah. And like, we use it sometimes to find girls. And then I started writing down how they do it, and then I blocked it. So
interesting.
I reverse engineered. So it's like, if you wanna like meet a girl to have fun on one of the apps, what do you do? And then like there was like 20 things, and I wrote them down, and I went to the team and I said, okay, let's reverse that. So let's make sure that whoever used the app is not with that intention. Let's make sure that whoever used the app is actually
it's like reverse customer research.
Exactly.
So what would you do, engineering team?
Do the opposite.
Exactly. That's how we did it. And the idea that came out of this was actually brilliant at the time. So we came up with this like kind of exclusive conversation concept.
Interesting.
It's like if you actually talking to one person at a time, then you're serious, because like you're not talking to many girls.
And that's the way of filtering those that are
And
serious.
it also mimics the actual social reality.
Yes.
Because oftentimes we were having one-on-one conversations.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's true. And the result of this, and that's why I always like tell like young entrepreneurs, is like, if they follow first principles, right? If they go find the problem and try to figure out the solution, we had like a crazy product market fit. Like once that was out, and it wasn't like, back to your question of the struggle, talking to investors, they were like, what is this? And like, and we had so many people saying no, like, what is this? And like I remember,
what types of investors were they?
So at that time there was like very early accelerators, and a bit of few angel investors. And then I remember like recording a video and sending it, and they say, no, you have not been selected.
Wow.
And they select like 20. And they're like, no, online dating would never work in this region.
I want to ask, there's like this thing about online dating. I think it's more for maybe Western online dating apps, about how it's now hard to actually build one in the current market because of the market dynamics.
Yes.
And there's a whole thing about like some people owning more than one, and it's kind of really hard. The network effects are just hard to compete with. In retrospect, this is not even about like your dating app, but I'm curious, like, do you think there was a world where the dating app you built could have maybe penetrated like other regions within Africa and could have kind of created early network effects that eventually become hard to dispute? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, that was the plan. So we actually built, and I'll go to that like when we started going to the next phase of building. But the idea was that the problem is actually universal.
Yeah.
And it happens more to cultures. So Western cultures, they like, when the online dating app started, like with Match.com, it was done in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
And then people who didn't really like that way, there was no other options.
Yeah.
And eventually that became the standard, even though there
were other options we could have explored, but we just never did. But now we have this standard that no one's moving away from.
Exactly. And then with Tinder, like massive, Tinder also is a crazy story, right? Like with its massive explosion of usage, it became the standard, right? Like, so you were swiping, and it drove the industry into that direction.
I see.
Interesting.
So that was the environment where we started, right? Like, so Hinge at that time was also starting to grow in the US with a model that is more leaning towards like serious dating.
Traditional, yeah.
But in the global south, I would say there was nothing. So we at that time it was brilliant because you could actually grow in all these directions. And investors couldn't see that at that time. And they were like, no, Middle East, it will never work. And
because the bias was there. I'm not even in a negative way. It was just like, it will never work, because that was your original thesis. Like, you asked the women and they said never.
So
it's like, people will say never sometimes, but like they would do the complete opposite if you give them the right thing.
Exactly. And the funny thing is that we had on our, so actually so investors said like, no. And then we keep doing it. And then I tried to use my work to spend on that process. I became very obsessed on solving that problem. And I had so many trials. And then because I don't understand how to build tech at that time, so I got people, they built it, and then it was wrong. And then at some point, actually, we saved some money. And then that's when my friend Ali came in the picture, and he like, I'll put this, you put this. So like $1,000. And then we hired this engineer to build it.
Interesting.
And then she built it. And then she lost everything. So she lost her laptop with the code. There was no cloud. And then we lost 6 months of money and work.
Oh my God.
That happened so many times, like 4 times with different stories, like hiring a developer in offshore. And then after 80% of the project, he just changed his mind and is like, hey, here's the code.
I can't.
And it's like, what I'm going to do with this code? Like, right?
This is so interesting because the journey in building a company is never smooth, right? And this happened 4 times. So you had multiple hits.
Yes.
What was it that kept you going? Hit after hit after hit.
That's exactly.
What was it that kept you going? And
that's
even
actually,
with the rejections that you're getting from investors, because oftentimes this can be very discouraging for entrepreneurs, right? But there must have been something that drove you to keep going. I'm really keen to hear what that was.
The problem, like the women in my family, like whenever I think that if I don't do this,
then it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist, and then they will keep suffering. That was my key.
So you're really driven by the mission.
By the problem, by the mission. Yeah. So, and I remember at some point after the code was gone, that was actually the 3rd or 4th trial. And then I remember for that night, that was the first time I said, okay, maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Like maybe I've tried, I did my best.
Yeah.
But then that's it. I've been spending for my own money and it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But what changed me at the same night is that idea of like, who will do it if you don't do it?
It's kind of like you don't have a choice.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like some of the biggest decisions of your life is not that you choose it, it's that the alternative is not an option.
And also like I'm always saying this now is like, it's okay to fail, but to know like you have done your best and then you fail. You have tried and then you failed.
That's it.
So in my view at that time, I've tried, but I have not concluded that this is not a viable idea.
Yeah.
Like I'm okay to admit.
So you have to keep going.
You have to keep going and to stop when you actually have the enough results to say that this is not a viable business, but not to quit because you've tried in pushing it.
Yeah.
How long did the dating app one go for? And I think on the customer acquisition point, because with consumer startups, that was a different time.
Yeah.
This is a different time. So if someone is trying to start up a consumer startup, there are certain things they definitely cannot do and get away with.
Yeah,
but
true.
then first 1,000 customers, 2,000, 3,000. What were the hacks, tips, things that worked then that you think might work now?
So I'll get to that and through the story, right?
Okay.
So we couldn't find any investors until actually at that time, like Flat 6 Labs, they were like one of the.
How far into the journey was this?
We're talking like a year and a half, maybe. But the year and a half before something serious, we don't have an app, we don't have anything. A year and a half, we're just like have something that we need to test. So luckily, Flat 6 Labs came in.
Okay.
And when they came in, so there was this program, so we went in, and then it took us 3 months after that to build like the actual app, and then. Yeah.
Was the accelerator process helpful? Like
it was very helpful.
Good.
It was very helpful. Like at that time it was my 3rd company, but I did not scale a company and not learn entrepreneurship, and it was very helpful at that time.
Yeah.
So for first time founders, I think accelerator is great. So because of all that and all the learnings that happened, we launched the demo. There was a demo day for Flat 6 Labs, and then we were supposed to get 1,000 signups. So we launched it, and then at that time also, one of my co-founders, her name is Sameh. So Sameh Ali. So when she joined us, her key role was to get us to the first 1,000 signups. So she's been involved in the process, and we built it together. And then she started talking to her friends. It's like, hey, like we need you guys to test with us. So we reached like 100, 200, 300, and then the demo day is actually like 3 days far.
Yeah.
And then Flatsy Slaps checking with me is like, where you are today is like, 300 signups. It's not enough. Let's see. And then one night, suddenly, like I'm sitting with my brother, and then it's like, oh, we actually the app crashed. We lost the servers, and like I was like, no, like we have 3 days. That could happen anytime, but not 3 days. And then he looks, and there's like, no. Actually, we're getting too many downloads that actually we've crashed, and we realized that we're going viral.
A good problem to
like
have.
we at that moment, every hour was like 2,000 downloads. Like
How do you go from like
what happened?
So what happened? Like a girl used the app, and then she spoke about it in a Facebook group. It's like, hey, like this is brilliant. Like
the influencers,
exactly.
the influence. You were early, Sameh. You were calling the trends
on Facebook. Yeah, it
Interesting.
was a Facebook group. And then the girl used the app, and then she said la la la, and then suddenly all the women groups started talking about it, and all those girls who said never, they like 30,000. We had 20 to 30,000 downloads until the demo day. It was crazy. It was phenomenal.
I'm sure the demo day would have gone well.
Yeah,
you just put up the charts. You're like, I say nothing.
Yes.
Look at that. That is market pull.
Yes.
But curious, because one of the problems you have with marketplaces is getting both sides of the marketplace to come on board, right? And so you have the women coming on board.
Yeah.
Were there the men? And what data did you show at that point that demo day arrived?
So of course, on the demo day, like we had like all this virality happening by again, like luck is involved. So we had like at the biggest showtime, like a lot of the virality happened. So we had a lot of user base. So my DAO was high, my MAU was high. But at that time, also early retention was high. But then exactly what you've mentioned is like the other side of the equation, which is the men.
Yeah.
It took some time to come.
Okay.
Yeah.
And our tech was not actually built for that scale. Like I told the team to build something for 1,000. Suddenly they're like, what is this? So again, after that high, we had a low where like retention was low, we tried to rebuild the tech and so on. And at that time, investors also showed us a very, very hard time to come in. Even with that, many investors said, no, like this is still not going to work. And I was just like, it was funny because So you show them all this data and stuff. And then a couple of investors said no. And I remember at some point after this, it was going to all come to a close because money was running out.
Yeah.
And I was also like, I finished everything and like spending. And then the team was like 8 people. And then I couldn't carry on with the salaries. And I even like, I remember that day, like I almost crying because like there's nothing else I could do.
It's hard because you've gotten to that point where you're like, I've done everything, yet it didn't work.
Yes. And I think that's a very good also lesson to investors to be very like straightforward and like kind and understand the journey. And to, at that time, I think what broke me is that like an investor who almost like was there to term sheet and
and
like,
then they just like,
and then on the last minute they're not even replying.
They
like
ghosted.
I'm saying, they ghosted. And it's okay to like investors to be in the conversation as long as you are in the conversation.
Keep talking
But
because
they
it's the middle ground that's terrible. It's like yes is the first best answer, no is the next best, but like that it's like don't do that.
And then like I remember those things very vividly because it was very emotional. And then a couple of hours later, I got this email from 500 Global. It's like, hey, we're investing. And like,
it just takes that one, It's always that
and
one,
then you're pumped again.
And then I'm like, fuck life.
Back on it.
I'm like
Forget
all
the rest.
over the place. Yeah, it's, it was a life kiss at that time. And I really believed in it, you know, like if I don't believe in it, it's fine, but I really believed in it. And the rest is history. Like,
so how did you get the men on board? See, because obviously you had the women.
Yeah. What you understand later is that men follows.
I was about to say that of every supply, of every marketplace,
this is the one
there's the one that you need to get first, and everyone will follow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
Women is much harder to get. So, and what happened after that is like, so I went to the US. I learned scaling. I learned that And again, here is where I found the references. So all this journey, I didn't really find references.
So with 500, you did the accelerator.
Yeah, in San Francisco.
cool. Yeah.
I was lucky to go there.
Yeah.
And there I've met all these like
And this
amazing
was your
founders.
first time to the US?
First time.
What was that
in the
experience
US.
like?
Yeah, it was first time in the US. Let me remember, it was the first time. Yeah, absolutely, it was the first time in the US. And
so the energy, the peer support, the mentors, the information,
was
all of
amazing.
that changed.
it was amazing. It was like, oh, so this is where all the things happening. Because in Flat Six Labs in Cairo, there wasn't amazing founders, but it was so early in their journey, right? So you find like there's a couple of startups like Wazzaf was there, was like pioneering Visita, like all these amazing founders. But they were very early in their journey, and I think they pushed us a little bit. But we needed to see like the $1 billion companies. We need to see those people. Like I remember having a conversation with a guy who spends $200 million of marketing, in a year.
And you're like, whoa, why
I'm
would
sitting
you
with you like directly, and
it comes back to what you were saying earlier. You can't be what you can't see, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
You need
being an
that
SF,
reference,
being around
exactly.
those
You can only go that
founders.
far.
You can only
Exactly.
And that's what that program did to me. Is like I went back, and in my mind is like, this is a global play. Like why am I trying to only work on Egypt? Like this is a global play.
So it really opened your mind and your ambition.
Yes, massively. And it also taught me the profession, because being an entrepreneur is a lot of art, but it's also a profession.
Yeah.
So you need to learn how to do it, right?
Yeah, I like that you say that.
Yes.
I say that in the future we're gonna see people who actually become like entrepreneurs after like maybe operating or whatever. It is a profession, it's a vocation. There's an art and a science to the job to do it well.
Yes, that's true. There's only as far as you can go without actually doing the profession.
Yeah.
And I think like I was lucky in that program that I started to learn the profession, and then I was lucky to test that in a market that is growing really with lots of numbers. So you start learning about like all the different phases, like the product market fits, like what is the clear signs of that, and how to push different levers to go to the next stage.
Growth.
How do you scale and so on. So I love that, and I went back and and I scaled it to like become like the dating app of the Middle East.
Amazing.
So you go to SF, you come back with huge ambition.
Yes.
Talk to us about Match Group and how the acquisition came about.
So at that moment, so now we are early 2019, and we are the number one dating app in the region. And at that time, I was raising actually a round to take it global. Yeah. So they started reaching out, and they're like, "Hey, like let's have a conversation." And it's like,
and were you thinking about acquisition
at any point in the journey? I love how you quickly no hesitation. I was thinking about it.
Like the team always like tease me because one time in the very very early days, like I wrote on a board like our journey, like this is where we need to get to 100,000 users. This is where to get to 1 million users. And then I draw like a couple of, and then I said 3 years, and then here is the acquisition from Match Group.
I love it.
Yeah.
So you saw it, like you had that in mind.
It was clear, but in that industry, like it was like very few players who acquire. And I just saw it something in the future because I wanted to build, and I can see the potential of what I'm building. But
and did you foster the relationship with them then, or did they come to you?
No, they reached out. Yeah. So they reached out and they said, "Hey, we'd love to see like what you're doing." And then we had all these like great conversations with the team. Of course, it was very nervous on my side.
I bet your dream. They're literally on your vision board, and they're like, "Oh my God, pinch me." Where was the business at the time they approached you for acquisition? Because I also think that influences the posture of the relationship. Yeah.
So like there's a lot of numbers I won't be able to share. No, but we were at the size of like we are growing in the Middle East. We've proved to be.
So you're in multiple markets.
Yes.
Beyond Egypt.
And we are actually the player.
Yeah. The key player.
The key player to win that market. But we're too early. We're still early. Yeah. So they could help so much on the journey.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think yes, I was nervous, but eventually when you always focus on what you're building, everything becomes easy. Like when you, so I was focusing on what I'm building and where I want to take it, and that was running those conversations. So I wasn't like
there wasn't.
There was times actually where I was advised. So we had a couple of conversations, and then I flew to meet the team in Paris, and we were just so like aligned on what we're trying to build,
That
and
values
where
alignment is
exactly,
always what founders say.
exactly.
Yeah.
And they saw us like as a good partners. And at that time, I was advised to get a professional like investment banker to run
the process.
and so on, because like I'm negotiating from the other side with people who are like experts in this.
The information asymmetry is crazy.
Exactly. But because I just believed so much in what I'm building and where I needed to go, I went through it on my own with the support of my amazing investors. Like, so my investors at that time was amazingly supportive on like, okay, like we follow your lead. And
with the team aligned as well. Did they
and the
want
team
to
was
sell at that
super
point?
aligned as well.
In retrospect, would you have done that again?
Yes, because I believe it was not just the financial aspect of it. So the financial aspect was amazing as well.
Yeah.
But it was more of the group, and this is something I have to say, like the group just have like a lot of wealth in the experiments they have done over the last 20 years. You cannot really like
compete with that.
It's like, I mean, you can definitely compete, but like you cannot just have that on the table and leave it.
Yeah. Oh, so it was really valuable for you.
It's super valuable.
Insights,
so and that's what I say actually for people who like try to get my advice on like, okay, we're now at an exit stage. We had this offer from a company. Shall we do it or not? And then my key question at that time is like, is it are you planning to stay in the company? Like what stage in the company is there? What value would that acquirer bring? Like, are they gonna like just move the company somewhere that you really don't want it to be? Are they going to change all the management and do it something else?
Right.
You have, these are the keys. Plus, of course, the financial reward, especially if you care about the company.
Yeah.
So that matters a lot. And my advice is like to stay in the room for weeks and make sure that the integration also goes smoothly. Yeah. Because it's
not just like it's done.
No. It's like, I think that the exit itself or the acquisition process itself is very tough at some point, but it's not like what happens after is actually the real thing. Is like the integration. How can you make sure that the newly acquired company is on pace with the group, the culture, and to move ahead aligned with why they acquired you, right?
Was it an acqui-hire? So they was it like an acquisition? And they brought
it's an acquisition.
Okay, it was an acquisition.
Yeah, it was an acquisition. Like the investors made good returns, and we as the founders, we made good returns.
I know you probably can't share because you had hinted a bit about that, but I'm curious more on the feeling, because we've had a similar conversation with like other founders, just trying to understand that exit part.
Yes.
As a founder who hasn't had an exit before, when you have an exit, especially when it's meaningful, and I want to believe that with Match Group it was, I would love to kind of get a sense of your psychological, emotional state and the evolution of that. As you kind of thought about what next to do.
I think I never spoke about this.
Really? I'm glad we're the first.
No, it was like an insane time in my life, because you know your life would change massively. Like I come from like a very, like I said, like middle, lower class family. And I know that my life would change massively, me and my family. And I know that with that, I would have actually the freedom to do whatever I want next. And that's a key like event in your life, right? And I knew that. But from just how high the stocks, the stakes, stocks as well.
Pun intended, that was such a good one. You were thinking about the stocks.
From how high the stakes it is. It's just a very, very, like from how high the stakes, it's just a very, very emotionally heavy process. So that's why, like, I think the advice to get someone to run the negotiations is actually a very valid advice, but you have to be very emotionally stable. And I remember like during the negotiations, like there were days and days where I just like doing nothing, but actually focusing on that. But then when that happened, I enjoyed that so much. But then one day, and I started working again, which is insane. One day I remember, I was in like half a day, because after the exit I stayed as a CEO, right? And I was just thinking about the next.
So to you, it wasn't done. So I feel
like
done. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Because if you spend one day and go back, you're like, this might be a milestone.
Yes.
But it isn't done.
It isn't done.
Literally just started. I like that. I relate a lot with that.
The marathon continues.
Yeah, it continues. And also because at that time we had like a a great like active user base.
And did the entire team remain?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they gave me like the autonomy to run it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But then with a lot of support coming from
That
the group
institutional
that I could
knowledge
use.
that you wanted
It's just
anyway.
unbelievable. Like it's just like you get to have a lot of for me the experiments is the hardest thing to recreate because other things you can learn from other companies. But like so so I knew that there's still a lot of people who could use the app who are not using it yet.
Yeah.
And now that I have this, I should be able to reach those people more. So that drove me for the mission. Like that drove me next.
How long did you stay at Match Group for?
So the next day, like I went on and started like building in the building mode and like, no, we have to take this to the next level. And then I stayed 2 years plus. And also I think one element here is that I was in a group that is very, very like it was listed. It's NASDAQ, $40 billion at that moment.
It's a public company.
Public company, and then suddenly you are like a CEO with other CEOs. So there's Tinder, there's Hinge, there's OkCupid, amazing like teams, and then you are at the same level, and you should act on the same level. So that kind of pushed forward like the need for me to learn and to be on that level, right? So learning everything about like governance, like accounting, like legal. It's like, we cannot just pay the vendor. Like, no, you cannot just pay
No, you can't do that. Interesting.
And scaling as well, of course, like what to do before you scale in a market and like the research that has been done in that way. And like what is like how to judge if that actually economics is going to work or not on the long term and how much you should invest for that. So I've learned like amazing lessons with the group. It's something that I'm always like I feel fortunate to learn that much in the group. Yes.
Fantastic. I was just randomly thinking before we transition to the next startup, because you've done quite a few. It's like in retrospect, when you did the travel tech, you would not have known if they told you that all of this was going to happen. Like if you went back to that Sameh who's like, I think the dating app is probably a better idea. Your future self will be like, you're probably right. Interesting. Yes. Okay.
But that's actually also what I always want to say before like we move to the next topic. That's why I always say that luck is very much like underrated.
Yeah.
So you could be the most brilliant founder and like you could have the most brilliant business model, but then you need that little bit of luck. So it's a lot of hard work, right? Yeah. It's also talent and skill.
Yeah. But then there's an element of luck.
Yeah. And you overcome, in my view, you overcome that element of luck by doing it so many times.
I was about to say that you increase your surface area of luck. Like you do it enough. And I mean, for Match, there's a saying, and some people agree and others don't, that startups are bought, not sold. Yeah. Like the acquirer needs to see value.
Definitely.
And that value was compounding over time. You had paid the dues.
Yes.
You're on the team. So incredible. So 2 years after like the acquisition, where did MNZL start? Well, what was the early anatomy of MNZL? Was it an earworm? Was it like an intense thing? Was it a thing that was clear from day one? Was it something, again, like a problem you faced? So it would be good to get a sense of how you...
So, like I followed...
And I guess just to also add to that, when you started it, did you have the desire to build again once it was sold? Like once someone...
I feel like you would never stop building because there would never be any... There'll always be problems. And you're like so anchored on the problem. So it's like, Sameh at like 11, like 100 years old, you're like, that problem.
The plan was to take a year off.
Yeah.
And then I was actually planning.
Year, did you?
Not at all. And the plan also was to become actually an investor.
Okay.
Interesting.
And I was very flirting with that idea. And I was like, okay, like there's a lot of these entrepreneurs that could help and like put like some angel investments and so on. But just a couple of like weeks and
a problem surfaced.
Because that problem I've been looking at it for even a year or a year and a half before, but I said like, I'll put it aside. But then whenever the time was there, I started seeing like, no, like this has to be fixed. So what was the problem? The problem actually started with why access to credit is super hard in Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So at that time I was trying to buy properties and so on. And I was like, but the cash I could use somewhere else. And I've lived in Malaysia and I've been to the US and Europe. So I know how easy it is to get a mortgage in these countries.
Yeah.
Why is it super hard to get a mortgage in Egypt, right?
Yeah.
And that was the drive. It was like, why? And then I started like doing a little research. So I spent like a couple of hours,
Just a little research.
like in my room, like reading. And then I started getting obsessed with the problem. And that's when luckily my co-founders like Besim and Desui, we were like,
Were the same co-founders from the
no. So
okay.
Okay. But we know each other for years, and I said so they missed the chance to come on.
Okay. You're like, well, here's another chance.
Yeah,
if you want
this
to.
is actually they are at that time they were doing like brilliant things on their own, so they couldn't really join. But that time we said, okay, like this problem is really big, and we believe that this is an amazing team, and now is the time is right to do it. So I followed the same process, and this is like advice for all entrepreneurs, like. Start from the problem, like do proper research, do smaller experiments to test. And that's how MNZL was born. So just to also talk a bit about MNZL. So in MNZL, we have figured out that actually very, very few people have access to credit in Africa.
That's correct.
But when you look at the ratio of people who own homes and cars, it's very different. So in Egypt, like 70% of families actually own homes.
Yeah.
And then these 70% of families cannot get credit from banks to do investments, to use their money, to spend on education. And that's where it's like, okay, like,
you have this asset.
we have to do this.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if we could figure out a way for people to use those assets to finance like their dreams and their needs, then that would be actually what we need to fix. So that's what we're doing. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
On the name.
Yeah.
MNZL.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Like,
so
how did you ideate on that? I always love hearing name ideation stories.
We did a lot of exercises.
Really?
Yeah. And then none really clicked.
It's like that's
really,
not the one.
well.
Yeah.
MNZL is actually a home in Arabic.
Oh, interesting.
So we started like looking at this was one of the suggestions. Yara suggested it, and then suddenly we tested it, and then everyone was like,
we
we love it. Yeah, we like Yara. And then everyone was like, okay, this is it.
The one.
Yeah, this is the one. And we tested it, and it went well so far. Yeah.
So the team.
Yeah.
2 friends.
Yes.
You've known them for years.
Yes.
How did you decide that they were the ones to come on board?
Especially with what you said earlier, that there's this interesting balance between we know each other, we trust each other, but like, are we a right fit for this problem?
Yes. So we knew each other for so long, right? And we've seen what we have done, right? We've actually worked briefly in certain like advisory projects, but then when we realized that we all like the space that we're going to work and love that, and that we know it, so we have the trust and we have the capabilities, then we have to do it together, right? And we set the boundaries at the beginning. It's like, okay, so there's a personal relationship, and there's a business relationship.
How do you draw the line? And you're really
I think it comes
keen to understand that.
Yes, I think it comes with a bit of experience and a bit of values.
Yeah.
So you always draw that line. In my like in Harmonica, like when I exited, my brother was my co-founder.
Oh wow!
And I learned and I learned early on that I have to draw that line very, very professionally in order for this to scale. Because no one wants, like, if you favor anyone or if you fail to deliver professionally because of a relationship, no one wants that. Neither you or the person or the company. Like, it's best for everyone to act very professionally. So that's what we do. So we work like with high integrity, very professionally, and they put the standards very, very high. Coming from
raising the bar.
Raising the bar.
Everyone,
they worked in like brilliant companies and they built brilliant things. So what I love about this is that it's like a melting pot for all these different like
experiences,
school of thoughts and experiences and so on.
How many co-founders are in MNZL?
So the 3 of us.
Okay.
Yeah. And their experience and skill set fit, right? So that's also very important. Like, I have other people, but they are like like, we cannot do this together. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So another thing is maybe from an education standpoint, because a lot of the time, many people don't understand the problem of credit in Africa. How would you say it's kind of different?
Yeah.
And like fundamentally, because I can see a thread across your experiences, like you take this really incredible global models and then you like contextualize it locally.
Yes.
And like make sure that it's locally relevant.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what are the nuances, I would say, in the credit industry, and then how you kind of thought of that off the back of MNZL that went into its early development at the early stages when you were refining the
So
recipe.
I mean, like, as financially, like the continent's still very early on, right? Like in the developed world, there's like the bank system is there from very, very early on. The financial institution is there. So it's still early on. So that matters so much with credit. Because like with opening bank accounts, the problem is slightly easier. With transferring money accounts, the problem is slightly easier because it's more like
instant.
Instant.
At
You need the
that
tech.
point,
There's no risk, you know, on the credit. But with credit, with the lack of all the credit data, it's very hard to take a credit decision. So that historically made the banks very, very restrictive on who to give credit to. So they would be like, no, you have to earn that much. You have to work in these industries. So that's why, like I said, like less than 8% had access to credit. So that's a very, very like unique thing because of these early markets. So what we understood is that people have a lot of assets to be collateralized on. These are things that they have built through the years and they own it and like they can show, and they have the salaries as well to pay it. So we don't just like lend without doing our studies. But it gives so much comfort for the banks and actually the lenders to do that when they actually there isn't a collateral and an
asset backed.
And in my view, that's actually the most fair way to lend, because with the other ways of lending, the NPL is quite high. So of course the banks are very restrictive, but then they came up a lot of fintechs who are actually lending unsecured lending. But then the interest rate is very high because
it's not adjusted to the risk because there's no insight on the risk.
Exactly.
And you can price because of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you just kind of give this
the
arbitrary high.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the risk is relatively high because people don't have like assets to collateralize. So if they haven't paid. So I see that the rest of the people are paying.
That's an interesting way
it's
to
almost
think
like
about
they're subsidizing.
Exactly. They are subsidizing. Exactly. And that's also like, why would you do that? Because if you have an asset, why would you subsidize others who are not paid? Like just collateralize that and get the best rates in the market. So we made it cheaper and easier for people actually to do that. And I'm happy where we're starting because we're starting at a very interesting technological times. So if you could use the mobile penetration and the AI aspect of it and the credit scoring engines, models that we're building is actually could get us, I believe, into a new wave of lending. We believe that if we could convert a home and a car into actually a wallet, then that would be very disruptive.
Oh, I like that.
And it's nice because this is a very developing market problem. Because if you go to the US or here in London,
it's not
the home equity loan is something people know, right?
They already do.
They already do it. But then this whole product is new to Africa. So if we could package it in a new model like the wallet, like imagine, so we're talking to customers like, hey, imagine your car and home is in your pocket and then you withdraw money when you want to, you return money when you want to. So it has that appeal with consumers as well. So we're very excited for it.
And I actually so excited for the future of the market creation opportunity, actually.
Yes.
Because like having access to like the aggregated data of stuff like that, you could unlock a lot of insight and value for customers themselves.
Yes.
That sounds very exciting.
Yeah. And like luckily we started like building around that. So we started to get like the early believers, like, you know, like my amazing investors and like the other investors coming on board. Because it's just that the problem is big and we're excited about solving it. It will take time, but we're excited with solving it.
I'm really curious because this is a highly regulated industry.
That is true.
And the previous businesses that you've built have not been within regulated industries. You don't necessarily have that fintech experience. However, you've assembled a really great team. So how did you think about building on your team, bringing on board individuals to fill in those gaps?
Yeah.
Given that, you know, you are great when it comes to like consumer and product adoption and so on, but the fintech piece, like how did you think through that when you were assembling the team? And then this regulatory piece as well. Yeah,
I think there's definitely so much value in having a team that understands like fintech and coming from the industry to solve the industry and disrupt the industry. But I've always like believed that an outsider
brings
could
a
actually very fresh perspective.
Yeah, you're not bounded by the preconceived notions.
You see
of the
like
industry,
first principles, and then you look from the outside, and if you could mix both, so if you could, so like being an outsider, that helped us so much with all these skills to start going in and disrupting that market. But of course, that gap has to be filled, right?
Yeah.
So we are a team of like learners. So like
Yeah.
So how did you fill that gap?
So I read so
Aside
much.
Did some research.
I
A little
actually
bit.
enrolled for a couple of degrees like
amazing.
online.
Interesting. Okay.
Again, amazing times like Coursera and like
Yeah.
you could
I think
just
that's one
get
of
a
the
degree.
benefits of this time.
Yeah,
Access
The
to
issue is
knowledge.
not access, it's like
Yeah.
curation. If you know where to
Yes.
go to,
exactly.
the amount of knowledge you would
Yes.
get.
Yeah.
Yes. So that of course part of it, but
Mm-hmm.
all the conversations, because we like in the exploration phase,
Yes, but-
talked to almost everyone working in the
Yeah.
industry in Egypt, like regulators,
Yeah.
like banks, NBFIs, to employees, to customers. So from the conversation, you learn so much. So,
Yeah.
and I'm starting from a point where I didn't know what's like how to calculate the interest rates
Yeah.
and what's discounting,
Yeah.
what's the flat rate.
Yeah.
So I started, but over the last like year and a half, like it just like
We're an
really
expert at
upskills,
this point.
yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, but also now we're at the time we're complementing the team with like experts from the
Experts.
industry.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah.
Interesting. I'm curious, how was fundraising this time? When did you start fundraising for the first round? Learnings from the previous experiences. Was it easier? I bet it was as a serial entrepreneur, or maybe more less hard instead of easier. I would love to understand how you approached the first round.
So that was my expectations.
Yeah.
That actually
that says a lot. You're like, I thought so
Yeah.
too.
But it wasn't. No, it was
Really?
very different than those expectations.
Yeah.
So the timing was a bit off when we started like doing the fundraise.
Yeah.
So that was the time where the global economy started
Yeah.
like slowing down, and all the
Oh.
VCs were like, oh no, like we have to, and the stock market with all the
Yeah.
crashed. So it wasn't the best time to go on and fundraise. And to overcome this, we started like going and taking this very like early ticket that can push us like 2 or
Like
3
angel
months
checks.
To
Angel
get you
checks.
to
to get us to the next.
some
early-
milestones
yeah.
Yes.
and then go and raise more.
I think that very first ticket was from my previous investors who have made like who believes in us, who knows
they
me
know
very
you.
well.
They're like, whatever you
Exactly.
do, I'll back it.
And remember,
Yeah.
we are starting from a space where the business model was still getting
Forming,
curated.
yeah.
So I remember the very early investors, they were like, well, you're great and there is something there, but like, but like, how are
wanna
you
see
exactly
more
gonna do
data.
it?
Yeah. How is this gonna make money? Yeah.
So it took us a while, and I enjoyed that process
Yeah.
actually of exploring and like getting to where
Iterating.
we are today. And that's where we started bringing like more like institutional investors. But it was very tough time,
Yeah.
and this is something I always say to investors in the region, like in the Middle
Yeah.
East. It's an ecosystem that is maturing.
Yeah.
And you as investors will are maturing. And there
Yeah.
are things that there's important feedback you need
Yeah.
to listen to from entrepreneurs.
I completely agree.
Yeah. And I think what those like investors thought at that time is like, no, Egypt now is not a good place to invest. Like this is a down cycle.
Yeah.
There's economical problems. And they just focused on this year
And I
while
think
ignoring.
that's quite
the-
short-sighted,
Yeah,
right?
very-
Because we're
especially
investing
for
for
venture,
the next 10
yeah.
years. So
Exactly.
even if we're in the down market now,
Exactly.
It's gonna
we have
kind
to
of
ride
like.
the
Exactly.
cycles, right?
I also even
So-
feel like
Yeah.
risk is return.
Exactly.
Like that is alpha. Like you have to do something that's
Exactly.
contrarian.
Exactly.
That's different.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
everyone is not doing for you to be able to get those returns
Yes.
that's different from the market.
And that's what curated. I love that period because actually the good investors would invest at those times, and the good
Yeah.
entrepreneurs would
Yeah.
build at that time,
Yeah.
and that's where you get deals away from the noise.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm very happy with
Hear ya.
with my current like investors. Like they came at the right time, with much less noise. So yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Well, that's great. We often wrap up the episode with a few questions.
Sure.
Do you want to go, Yvonne?
So, Sameh, what would you be doing if you weren't building MNZL now?
And not playing football. I guess I would have tried to work to improve like how the governments work in Africa.
Hmm,
So how could we use tech to improve
interesting.
like the government entities? Like government
Okay.
has so much power in
Yeah.
Africa.
Yeah.
So if
Can be
you
much
could
more efficient too.
bring all these skills,
Yeah.
I think it would be very, very efficient.
Interesting. And time machine. You're in a time
Yeah.
machine. When did you start the first startup? What year?
2014.
So we're going to 2014
Yeah.
now. And it's open and you have 30 seconds to tell Sameh something. 30 seconds.
So I think like believe in yourself, like just keep going at it. If you have the right model and if you have and you believe in yourself, you can do it. So just keep going at it and do it. Find a mentor. Speak to that mentor to guide your directions. Of course, like how to choose a co-founding team. So spend more time on that aspect, on how to choose the team that would carry the company on. Those are the things that I was going to say. But also enjoy the process. I think at that time you get stressed very easily. You get the highs super high, you get the lows super low.
You're so focused on the destination as well.
Exactly.
You're in the process.
Exactly. So now you learn that no, it is actually an amazing process of learning and exploring, and you should actually enjoy it, and it's very enjoyable. And get your lows, slightly higher, and get your highs slightly lower. And enjoy the process.
Fantastic.
I
love it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sameh, for joining us on another great episode of The Startup Leap. Follow us at The Startup Leap, and until next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Startup Leap, TSL for short. Leave a review, tell us what you think of this episode on all of our platforms at The Startup Leap Pod. Do you have a question? Ask us and we'll ask our guests. Go to thestartupleap.io. See you next time.